Hey, thanks so much for listening to the Ridge Community Church podcast. My name is John. I'm one of the pastors on staff at the Ridge, and our vision is to bring the hope of Jesus into every home. So as a piece of that, our goal each week is to bring you something that's hopeful and helpful. So subscribe to this podcast to make sure you don't miss any hopeful and helpful conversations. Hey everyone, and thanks for listening to this episode of the Ridge Community Church podcast. If you find today's episode hopeful and helpful, then please follow or subscribe and then rate and review so that more people can find the conversation. This week, I get to share with all of you a conversation that I had with Ben. He's a physical therapist and Ridge attender, and over the last year or so has really taken a deep dive into personal growth and development. Our conversation really focuses on the types of habits that Ben has added to help him grow, why this has made such an impact on his life, and how he reflects on the things he learns to put them into practice. This is my conversation with Ben. Well, hey, Ben, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Oh yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah. All right. I'm gonna start you off with a curveball. Okay. The fair just started, the Wisconsin State Fair. Do you have a favorite food to eat at the fair?
Ooh, that's a curveball. That's a good first curveball question. Yes to all the food.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh gosh. Yeah. I avoid it if I can. I spend way too much money out there. Gosh, even it's going to sound really basic, but just the deep fried mozzarella sticks, just something about watching them take that stick of cheese and throw it down in the deep fryer, make it fresh, throw it on your plate. I love mozzarella sticks, as is pretty much any restaurant I go, but just something about watching them make it there at the fair in the deep fryer is just something, I really enjoy.
Oh, I love that. So I started going to the fair and I started I'm going to try one just obnoxious fried food a year. And so far I've got the deep fried peanut butter and jelly sandwich and deep fried Oreo, which honestly a deep fried Oreo just tastes like a donut.
Yes.
And then I've done the deep fried Twinkie, which once again tastes like a donut. But okay, so follow-up question: deep fried mozzarella stick. Tell me the difference between a deep fried mozzarella stick and a cheese curd.
Ooh, gosh, you're asking me all the hard Wisconsin questions here. They're all great.
Yeah.
I was going to ask you if you had ever ventured to try those, was it grasshoppers or crickets or something they did a few years ago? There's a bug they deep fried. That might have been 3 or 4 years ago.
Yeah, what's interesting, I'm a huge baseball fan, and at T-Mobile Park, it's the stadium that the Seattle Mariners play in. Their famous food that they serve there is you can buy roasted grasshopper. I haven't tried it yet, but it's on my list. Maybe get a bunch of people to try one.
Yeah, I think we'll should leave eating locust to the biblical days.
Okay, yeah. All right. Hey, excellent segue there, though. That transition that's great.
Sure.
Okay, so conversation topic today is talking about personal development, right? And how do you?
Yes.
I know that's a passionate area for you. So I'm curious, how did you get started or interest in this idea of kind of personal development, trying to grow and I guess become a better person?
Yeah. So I think it really didn't hit me until I would say early last year. Kind of, where I had, I was kind of cruising through life, I'm hitting my early 30s now. And, I got a healthy son, got a good career, good job. I've been at the Ridge, 5 years now. Solid spiritual life. It just kind of hit me, that I was kind of coasting through life. I did not really, you think about goals, what's your 1-year plan? What's your 5-year plan? Kind of having that vision of where you want to be. And I guess it kind of hit me early last year. I kind of coast and kind of just take things as they come. But I really didn't have kind of a vision, I guess, for kind of where I wanted to go. So I kind of took that upon myself, just to kind of grow, develop, and yeah, kind of that just kind of hit me in my early 30s that I wanted to, you know, kind of take steps and take affirmative action to be the best person I could be.
Yeah, was that like a conversation that you were having with somebody, or was it kind of just like a moment of self-reflection that you're like, huh, I wonder if there's more.
Yeah, no, there wasn't really any kind of specific conversation. It was kind of just one of those things where, went through like COVID and kind of
Mhm.
we were coming out of it. And I don't know, it's one of those, early midlife crisis things.
Sure,
I
yeah.
would say hopefully not in my
Yeah,
midlife crisis. I'd, like optimally to make it past 60. So hopefully 30
right.
wasn't it. Um, yeah, I don't know. I guess, you hit the next decade of life and you're like, hits that question, what am I doing with my life? And, with these next 10 years, I mean, really, who do I want to be and where do I want to go?
Sure. So at what point did it become like an area that you started to be like passionate about that you're like, wow, I really think this is really valuable and I think more people should do it?
Yeah. Um, I think a big thing that started me off on it is more so like the mental side of it, like vindication. I think, am I like, where do I get my purpose?
Hmm.
Do I get
Yeah.
my purpose from my career, from my friendships, from my, personal relationships, from social media exposure? Like, where do I find that vindication and what am I putting, you know, what am I creating to be my foundation? Or it's just kind of like, building habits. I was kind of like, like devotionally, I was kind of on and off. Exercise, I go through seasons where I was into my fitness and then not. Career wise, I'd really have that push to move up in the ladder. And then there are times I kind of just, I don't know, aimlessly worked and did my 9 to 5.
You mentioned like forming the habits, right?
Mm-hmm.
What has been helpful for you to like form habits that stick?
Sure. So one thing I got into that I had tried in years past and absolutely hated was journaling.
Yeah.
Um, oh gosh, how many times are you sitting in church on Sundays and they're sitting there talking about, oh, keep a journal. Every personal growth person you talk to will talk about journaling. I tried in the past. I had the same journal for like 6 or 7 years, and just I do a page and then forget about it for a year, and just that has never been my vibe. But I think really the breaking, like kind of what broke me through into that next level, it was kind of looking, taking your short and long term goals and objectifying them, like putting them on paper, saying them out loud, like having
Mhm.
them somewhere where they're not just gonna, they pop in your brain and they pop out. Once you write them down, they're there. So yeah, I would say journaling, what I would do is I would kind of look at like, okay, I'd have every few weeks, like I'd have little bullet points, like little, baby steps, things I wanted to do in 2 or 3 weeks. And, at points there would be like, where do I want to be 6 months from now? Um, but yeah, I would say journaling, kind of really starting to put in those little baby steps kind of helps to create a more long-term vision for, kind of who I want to develop into being.
Yeah. So talk me through journaling. So is that like you mentioned the goals thing? So is because I know it kind of looks different for everybody, right? For me, when I
Mm-hmm.
think of journaling, my go-to is my experience, right? Which is like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
I journal prayers. That's typically like
Mm-hmm.
my form of journaling that's been helpful for me. Like
Mm-hmm.
you, I was like, man, I do not like journaling. I really don't want to like journaling, but it works.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
um,
Yes.
so what is your journaling experience like?
Sure. And I think you make a good point that it's different for everybody. I mean, sometimes people just write about their day. Sometimes people are using it more for like, like a mental health thing if they're
Right.
working through stuff. Or yeah, like a prayer journal, people are keeping track of prayers. I mean, everybody, I don't know. journaling is, essentially an umbrella term. There's a
Yeah.
million different ways you can use it. And I, really think it's just tailored to the individual and kind of what works for you.
Hmm.
So for me, I mean, so I am a therapist by trade, physical
Mm-hmm.
therapist,
Yeah.
as you know. So that's kind of the way my brain works. And that's just, I guess I'll take it a direction that I understand. So with my patients, I set goals for people every day, every week. Um,
Yeah.
and it's not just like, let's say like John's hip. Um, when I'm writing out that plan of care, I have to do short and long-term goals for that. And I'm not going to say like, hey, in 3 weeks, I hope John's hip feels better, which I mean, I do, but I'm, I make it more objective. Like, no, by 3 weeks, I'm going to get these measurements. John's going to be moving his hip in this range. Like his strength is going to go up by this muscle grade. I objectify it. I make tangible, like measurable numbers. Um, and that's my therapy world. That's so taking that into journaling for personal growth, I just don't put like, this week I want to exercise more or this week I want to eat better. Because you look at like, January 1st, New Year's resolutions, a lot of people do that. And, if you don't objectify it, it's very easy to fall off.
Hmm.
So, instead of saying, hey, I'm going to exercise more, the next couple of weeks, I'm going to go in at least 3 times a week, actually
Hmm.
putting something objective on there. Um,
How
or,
frequently do you go back and look at those goals and objectives?
sure. Um, I would say I try, when I'm doing it well, I'm not going to say I'm perfect.
That's the key,
But
right?
yeah, optimally every few weeks,
Hmm.
I like to look back. There's times in the morning where I'll look at it before I leave to work just to kind of start your day.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, even like spiritually, I have a goal, like I'm going to do a devotional every morning
Hmm.
or at least 6 days a week, or, you know, uh, interpersonally, like I'm going to reach out to two old group members of mine that I have not talked to in a while.
Hmm.
Um, little stuff like that. But I would say I probably circle back to it, every few weeks or so.
Hmm. I really appreciate the kind of the strategy of figuring out how your brain works. Like, right, for you, the
Mm-hmm.
goal setting objectives is like so present in your everyday that has become a way to, like, that's how you naturally think about things. So you're like not doing something out of the norm, right? Although I would have appreciated maybe if you talked about like
Mm-hmm.
tennis elbow instead of hip, because hip definitely implies that, I'm certain things. But
I was gonna ask you, hey John, does anything hurt? So I can roll with this, like any body part.
right.
So
No, I was gonna tell you, I've
yeah.
got tennis elbow right now. So if you got
Oh
anything,
man.
send it my way. um,
Oh yeah.
but
Expedite some things for you out to Washington. Sure.
thank you, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I'm curious. When you're trying to learn something new, where you're trying to learn as part of like your objectives, or you're trying to grow, do you gravitate towards like books or maybe YouTube videos, podcasts, audio? What do you have something that you maybe gravitate towards?
Sure. Um, I would say books and podcasts. I can't say I'm a huge video person. Occasionally YouTube, um, something I'll jump into every once in a while. I would say for the most part, especially with like the morning commute and like kind of getting your head in the right place for like what kind of person you're going to be that day, or like
Mm.
how am I going to move towards my goals today. I think a podcast in the morning commute, at least for me, doesn't work for everybody, but there's so much out there. And it's not the same podcast every day. I'll kind of just vary it based on what I'm feeling.
Yeah.
But I'd say podcasts, and then I would say books as well. Um, books, it just kind of depends on the season of life. I'm not one, I can't pound through a bunch of, you know, personal growth books.
Hmm.
I might do one and then flip to fiction and then flip to like more of a science-based book. So I'd say if anything, podcasts are probably my go-to.
How do you go about picking ones that you like? How do you go about like vetting those or picking them? Is like based on recommendations you get? Like, how do you find the things that are helpful for you?
Well, algorithms are great and search engines.
Ah, the blessing
Or
and
you
the curse of
type,
the algorithm. Yes.
oh yes. Yeah, I'd say honestly, algorithms, they've spit out some pretty good stuff. Or even if that's not a podcast for me, I'll see like a keyword and
Yeah.
then it'll hit me like, oh, hey, actually, now that I think of that, maybe this is like a topic I want to dive into a little
Mhm.
bit. Um, yeah, I would say, yeah, it's honestly kind of a sporadic process.
Mm.
But I think that makes it more intriguing, as opposed to say hitting the same topic 50 times in a row. I mean,
Right.
you definitely don't want it to be monotonous. You want to switch things up a little bit.
Yeah. Do you have like a when you're listening or you're reading, is there a way that you find helpful to I use the expression eat the meat, spit out the bones, where it's like, hey, what's helpful,
Hmm.
what's not? How do you separate those things when you're trying to like to learn like what I
Hmm.
said, whether it's a book or like whether it's a podcast?
Yeah. So actually, so two different ways I do it. So with podcasts, usually most podcasts before my commute is done, the podcast finishes. So there's kind of that silent time in the car where, I don't flip on the radio. I kind of just, it's that sitting in silence and kind of digesting it.
Hmm.
And like, okay, like what did I learn? Usually there's like one or two statements that'll pop out to me. And I'll kind of hone in on those. So podcast wise, that's how I at least process those. For books, I'm not one to highlight. I don't know. I don't like writing in books. So
That's so interesting. So people are like, though, that you'll see their books and they're like completely underlined all the way through. And for other people, it's like they
yeah,
can't bring themselves to put pen to paper.
no, I cannot. And my significant other does. So we differ in that, pretty significantly. But I'll have like a little notebook, and so if it's a personal development growth book, I'll go through one chapter at a time. I usually wouldn't do more than one or two chapters a night,
Mm.
because I really want to sit on that topic, and I will actually write down. Probably I have some chapters I've like have two bullet points, two sentences. Other chapters like I've got 10 or 12, just depending how dense the book is. But I will actually, yeah. So by the time I finish a book, I've probably got, three or four little notepad pages of like
Mm.
little bullet points. But then if I hit a season of life, 6 months down the road, where it's like, gosh, I really want to revisit this, instead of rereading the whole book, I have this like little mini 3-page bullet point synopsis of pretty much all the big points I took out of it.
Mm.
Um, so that kind of
I love
saves
that.
me from, yeah, it saves me from reading the same book 5 or 6 times.
uh, so I'm really appreciating that. I'm noticing a theme of like really thinking about and reflecting on the material that you're kind of going through. I know it can be really easy to, you hear something, it's like, oh, that's great. And you kind of just move on. What types of questions
Hmm.
maybe are you asking yourself when you're reflecting on those things? Like whether you're in the car for a little bit, is there like a process that you go through in your mind?
Hmm. Um, yeah, I think I kind of take, I'll take that podcast and say, I'll think, how does it apply to me? Which
Mm.
seems very like, duh, like that's why you're listening to it. But, like maybe I'm listening to something on financial wisdom.
Yeah.
Um, but then there's like, or like a podcast on how to grow your business. But I can actually translate that into, okay, like, how do I want to, like, I don't know, it could relate to familial relationships. so like if you're listening to like something about like a real estate company and like how to be an investor and grow, there's certain points you can take, not just in the financial world, but also there's a lot of good interpersonal stuff too.
Hmm.
So yeah, even listening to, a podcast on one topic. I mean, I guess that's one thing I'll kind of do is relate it to other aspects of my life.
Hmm. Yeah, that's really interesting because I think that broadens out. One, you may be listening to on a topic that you don't have any interest in starting a business, but the way that it talks
Mm-hmm.
about how I don't know this area of investing may just apply to, like you're saying, like a relationship that you're in, or um,
Mm-hmm.
the ways that you're talking to or caring for people. Like, maybe it's customer service representatives, and it's like, oh, that's actually some helpful tool that I can use to resolve this conflict in my, you know, in my relationship with my family or my significant other or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I appreciate
Mm-hmm.
that thought process.
Mm-hmm.
So so you reflect on these things, you're going through, you read this book, you've got your notepad, and you're like, okay, I want to make this change. I want to do this thing
Mm-hmm.
differently. How do you apply
Mm-hmm.
it in a way that sticks?
I think a big thing, and I think it's where a lot of people fall off if we go back to like New Year's resolutions. Not just with your health and fitness, but also with like your relationships, your spiritual life. It's repetition. It's not
Mm,
all going to happen in a day. That's why I do goals. I don't just do like a 1 year plan. I have like a 2 to 3 week plan, and they're little things. I think the little things really add up.
mm,
So actually going back makes me think now. So when I started journaling, um, one of my big things I had struggled with was like like I said, vindication. Where do I get it from? I always felt like I had to prove myself
mm,
to, my coworkers. I had to prove that I was, this great therapist. In the church, I had to prove I was a great Christian. To a partner, I had to prove that I was a adequate, you know, relational partner. To my son, like feeling like I had to be a good enough dad. So kind of one thing I had to learn early on in journaling was that I don't have to prove myself to anybody.
mm,
Um, and I kind of started, because, you know, I mean, we're already good enough and, you know, God has already vindicated us. So that's where your foundation should be,
mm,
is that God, you're already enough for God. And that's something I had to remind myself. So I actually started writing that every single morning.
mm,
Um, every day before I walked out the door, work day, non-work day, wrote, I don't have to prove myself to anybody. And I did this over and over. And eventually I stopped. But then a couple months after that, I looked back because it kind of hit my head. I had written that 114 days in a row.
wow.
Um, so then that was another journaling thought process morning. It's like, okay, after 114 days, like, what did I get out of this? Had I done it 7 days and quit, probably wouldn't have gotten anything out of it. But
Yeah.
I think getting things to stick, it's just, being patient with yourself and just enjoying, you know, not just looking to enjoy the outcome, but enjoying the process as well.
Mm. You kind of touched on this with your reflections about God and his views of you, but I'm curious, how has your faith kind of affected this whole process and this journey for you?
Mhm. Um, I'd say when I started this process, I wouldn't say my faith was, I don't know. I would say I was doing pretty good. I just, I wanted to do better.
Sure.
Um, and I think faith wise, again, it's just constantly reaffirming yourself that, like, you know, you've already won in Christ and God says you're good enough. But, habitually, I mean, I will do my devotional every day. Um, waking up, take 10 minutes to do that, always spend a little time in prayer. And it's just one of those habits I've developed the last couple of years. It's days, honestly, it feels weird not to do it.
Mm.
Um, or there's those days that'll hit me at lunchtime, like, wow, I feel different today. Like, oh yeah, I forgot to do that this morning. But I would say no, one of those things where you just, it's repetitive. You just get in the habit with it, and it becomes surprisingly easy.
Is there any other thoughts that you have or anything that you might think that would be helpful for somebody to think about or think through or anything like that?
Sure. So actually, one thing I recently got into was imposter syndrome. Was very intriguing to me. Like going into your day thinking like, wow, like I'm not good enough for this, for this job, like friendships, faith wise, So imposter syndrome, something I got very intrigued with, and I remember listening to something talked about, in a way, we're all imposters. You are an imposter of the person you are a year from now. So kind of using that as, okay, I am an imposter right now, but it's because I'm working to be something better. Yeah, I don't know. That was my recent interesting personal development thought I had.
I'm curious, is there any, like, it seems as though you just have like a genuine curiosity to learn and grow in different areas. Has that always been the case for you? Like, are you just generally a curious person, or is that has that had to have been something you like created or stoked through curiosity, if that makes sense?
I kind of think it's something that was created because I think leading up to my 30s, it was just kind of sporadic growth and nothing was really organized. Just kind of, I would randomly grow for about one area and then I'd randomly go to another one. And I think journaling kind of helped me to put things on paper and really see everything as a whole. So I think one thing that really helped, so going back to those short-term goals, I kind of took every aspect of my life, health-wise, spiritually, interpersonally, and my work life. And for my goals, I'll write 1 point for each of those. And then personal as well. So like personally, maybe I want to read half a book. Spiritually, I want to jump onto a new serving team, something I've never done before. Work-wise, I might, just want to be more efficient in a certain metric. So yeah, I'd say curious wise, I kind of had to develop that, that organization.
Yeah. And I think what's become clear, even just like chatting with you, is that it sounds as though the more that this has become a habit, the more that you get involved in like learning and growing, like the more it becomes something that one becomes more natural to do instead of just like trying to willpower it into existence. You know what I mean? But two, it becomes something that, like you said a little bit earlier, you enjoy the process of it too. Yeah.
I think in enjoying the process is really what makes things stick. And actually before I'll write down like kind of those new goals, I'll look at the old goals. And if I feel that they have been met, I'll check it off. And there's just something very vindicating about checking that off. Like, you know what? Like, I didn't eat any fast food this week. You know what? I got to check that off. It's kind of learning to celebrate those little victories as well. And learning to find the joy and, accomplishing those little things.
Yeah, there's a lot of power in that little joy. Even, even if you brought us all the way back around to junk food. I really appreciate that. The cyclical nature of that right there.
Oh yeah.
Well, Ben, thank you so much for chatting with me about this. I feel like I've got some things that I want to try from our conversation. So I appreciate that and I appreciate your time.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Well, that was my conversation with Ben, and I think my biggest takeaway is the reflection period that Ben takes whenever he gets done with a podcast or a book. I really appreciate the idea of not moving on until you've given something enough reflection to grow from it. In fact, my encouragement for you today would be that after this podcast ends, take a minute or two to just reflect on what you heard, and then figure out how that fits into your particular context. Well, thanks for listening to this episode of the Rage Podcast, and make sure to subscribe and follow so that you don't miss any hopeful and helpful conversations.